We've been told for weeks now by the American president. We've won, everything's destroyed, it's over, they lost. And yet, that's not what we're all watching. He said no one would have thought they were going to attack the Gulf. Everyone knew they were going to attack the Gulf.
After 2 wars with Iran, they still don't have the clarity?
Everything that we know, Ananya, suggests that that is the case. I think we are potentially looking at something that looks more like special operations. Chief of Staff of the Army turning around and saying, we don't have enough soldiers.
Hello and welcome. The war in West Asia is touching its 1-month mark. The airstrikes that started in Iran have now become the new normal in most Gulf capitals. As fatigue starts to set in, many of us are wondering if this war is inching towards its end or the start of something bigger. To make sense of this, I'm being joined by Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project. He formerly worked as an advisor in Israeli Prime Minister Barak's office and the Israeli negotiator for a peace plan with the Palestinians. Daniel, it's so good to have you on the show.
Well, it's good to be with you, Ananya.
Daniel, let's talk about the negotiations first. Amid the contradicting claims that we are hearing, what do you think is really happening behind the curtains?
Well, if I give my best assessment of these contradictory messages we're hearing, the assumption has to be that there are a number of parties able to speak to both the American and Iranian leadership who have their own interest in how this can be de-escalated and brought to an end. That's an interest, it seems, that's shared by most of the world, given what we're seeing, the impact on the economy globally, the cost of fuel, of course, food, fertilizer, those knock-on effects. So we know that, for instance, the Turkish leadership, the Turkish foreign minister has been very active, various channels. We know there are regional states that have played a mediating role in the past. Some of them have now been directly impacted. Oman, Qatar stand out. We know that the Pakistani leadership, who've developed this interestingly close relationship to the current White House, who are talking to the Iranians, Egypt, others. They are doing is exploring whether backchanneling, mediating can be useful. However, we have been in a place before where the US has used the cover of diplomatic negotiations as it prepared for and then launched war. In June of 2025, they were in the middle of negotiations, Omani mediated, when Israel launched a war that America then briefly joined. This year, the Omani foreign minister had just been in talks in Geneva. He was reporting back in Washington, and on that very night, the war was launched. And this time around, we see America moving more military resources from East Asia to the Middle East region, Marines, expeditionary forces, more warships. So there is understandable suspicion on the Iranian side. We also don't yet have a serious negotiating proposal on the table. The American president seems to think that he has won this war and can therefore dictate terms of surrender. That is not at all how Iran sees this. He has 2 very unusual, and I would argue ineffective, negotiators at the helm without expertise, Witkoff and Kushner. So the negotiating track does not look all that promising. There may be other options, though.
Right. I want to come to the doublespeak in a moment. I want to ask you, even if there are indirect channel of communication between the US and Iran as we speak, don't you think the foreign minister of Iran would be in the know? Because he has denied.
Well, I think what we have clarity on from the Iranian side is, first of all, no, we're not begging for negotiations. That's a misrepresentation of where things are. Secondly, there's the rebuffing of a claim that there are direct talks. But thirdly, there is some confirmation that there are exchanges of messages, that countries have approached Iran and Iran has produced its own response. The expectation from many of us is that trying to negotiate a broad agreement, similar to what took place twice before when America and Israel then launched military strikes, is not likely to be the path out of this. What might be more likely is creating a predictability of response from the various warring parties so that Trump gives a victory speech in Washington, D.C., the Iranians give a victory speech in Tehran, Netanyahu gives a victory speech in Jerusalem. Those victory speeches on the American and Israeli side overlap significantly, not with the Iranian side. We'll be left to pore over and pick, which bits were more credible, which were less credible. But there's a predictability of response that actually leads to an end in the fighting. Right now, we are more in an escalatory logic than a de-escalatory one.
Do you expect Israel to hinder the ongoing indirect line of communication?
Well, Israel has been quite clear in seeking this war for an awfully long time. I don't want to make light of American agency, that America has its own internal dynamics which have driven ultimately towards this war. But I think it's hard to imagine that this would have happened without Israel, without Netanyahu's constant push, relentless trying to pull the Americans into this. 2 visits just in the 8 weeks preceding the war of Netanyahu to Trump, 15 phone calls, we understand. So that was what significantly got us into this war. Subsequently, Israel has tried to keep the war going, keep America in the war, go up the escalatory ladder, hitting oil depots, the attack on the South Pars oil field, which led to the response against the Qatari gas facilities by Iran. So I think Netanyahu will use his influence to keep this going. We, of course, have to factor in probably the most significant variable in all this, which is, I'm sure you and I both, Ananya, wake up every morning. What has the American president said, put out on Truth Social? How do we read the latest rantings? Because that's what they often amount to. And the unpredictability of the US president, the fragile ego, the information bubble which he lives in, means that this could go in any direction at any time. I know that there's a tendency sometimes to attribute that to that's a smart tactic. I don't think there's much smart thinking going on there, though.
Let's deep dive there a little bit, Daniel. In the first week of the war, I think it was Marco Rubio, if I'm not wrong, who first suggested was Israel that had already decided to strike, forcing the US to act preemptively. But can Israel's pressure alone explain why Donald Trump gave the green light? Or did Washington genuinely believe that a few weeks of airstrikes could cripple Iran's military, nuclear program and leadership? Because who was there in the room to not guide them properly?
Yeah, it was one of those kind of reveal moments when Secretary Rubio said there was an imminent threat. And then he explained what the imminent threat was. The imminent threat was Israel attacking Iran. Iran would therefore respond against American targets. So who's the imminent threat here, Iran or Israel? He gave an answer which they've been trying to walk back ever since, I think largely unsuccessfully. I think we have to take very seriously and be very concerned, wherever you are in the world, Ananya, that for all the previous flaws and shortcomings in American policy, and we saw them play out in West Asia over decades, nonetheless, there was some sense of checks and balances in the US system, not always perfect, of an interagency process, again, not always perfect. The sense today is none of that really applies in this administration. The senior leadership, you look at those cabinet meetings, and we witnessed another one just recently on the US side, an exercise in sycophancy. Who can massage the ego of the president more than the next cabinet member? And you rub your eyes and you say, this isn't a serious system. And we know that there is not expertise in the room. And in that context, the ability of the president and a small team who are far from being the A team to make the correct decisions and the ease with which they can be influenced, including by outside powers. In this case, Israel, which has a unique purchase on American policy. I don't think I'm revealing any secrets or telling anyone they don't know, or telling anyone something they don't know. The role of the lobby, the extent to which American politics for so long has been marinated in Israeli talking points, it can lead to these kinds of a decision, not having thought it through. It's a terrifying combination of incoherence and incompetence. And we see the American president giving different justifications, different interpretations of what's going on. He said, no one would have thought they were going to attack the Gulf. Everyone knew they were going to attack the Gulf, including the Gulf, which is why the Gulf was so against this. That's what we're dealing with here. I don't think we can make light of it. We can look, you and I could spend time unpacking, okay, but let's look for a geopolitical logic. We could find one. We could talk about global transportational and energy choke points, and if the US could control that, or if the US can take down Iran, then it can finally do its pivot. But none of it makes sense, really. None of it holds water, especially if we consider that just a few months ago, America released its national security strategy document. It absolutely deprioritized West Asia. And yet here we are, dismantling assets in Europe, dismantling assets in East Asia, moving them to an area which was deprioritized. So it only makes sense in the context of the very special and unusual relationship with reality, truth, facts that this administration has.
Right. Daniel, I had asked someone in Tehran about this national strategy that Trump, I think, released just in November last year, a couple of months ago. And they said, we never took that seriously then, we're not going to take that seriously now. And I think that's what he was alluding to. Also, Daniel, since you say that the picture is that ominous, Trump has already said that Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner will still be leading the negotiations, the indirect channel of communication that is being at least established as we speak. What are you expecting now? How qualified are these men on paper and in the room?
So they are not qualified. Let's be clear, you can make up for that. Yeah, it's actually an important thing in a negotiation that your interlocutor knows you speak on behalf of the president, that you can close deals and sell them to the president. One of the many weaknesses under Biden was that Secretary Blinken wasn't maneuvering on his feet. He wasn't taken seriously. So a big bonus here is that Witkoff and Kushner can apparently carry the day if they deliver things. And they don't have to be experts, but they do have to have some understanding of the other side. They have to have expertise in the room. They have to have been properly briefed. They have to have some kind of team that can go deeper into these things. And all of those things are missing. After 2 wars with Iran, they still don't have the clarity? Everything that we know, Ananya, suggests that that is the case. They continue to go blundering in. And what those of us who speak to some of the parties involved are being told is jaw-dropping in terms of the apparent unawareness of the material that they are handling at any level of depth and sophistication, the impatience, and of course, this nagging doubt as we all look at this that hovers over this. How much of a corporate self-enrichment scheme are we witnessing at the moment at the highest echelons of American governance? We know the wealth of the corporation and of the family.
Daniel, it's also being said, and something you also referenced to previously, that Trump's sudden focus on negotiations is just a smokescreen. He's actually buying time for the US mariners to arrive near Iran, which we're hearing is around 2,000 soldiers. How do you see that? And are we really looking at a ground invasion of Iran?
You have now reports, I think it's in the Wall Street Journal, Ananya, that we might be looking at 10,000 troops. We certainly are openly being told that in the region of a lower number of thousand than that are on their way now. The longer this goes on, the less credible the assertions of we've won already. We've been told for weeks now by the American president, we've won, everything's destroyed, it's over, they lost. And yet that's not what we're all watching. We were told just recently that apparently the president gets a 2-minute video package update daily of just stuff blowing up. This was reported on NBC. It seems quite credible. The more we see exposed that there's not a thought through underlying strategy, the more exposed we are to the possibility that, if you're the military, you are tasked with what can we do next? What can change this dynamic? And your job as the military is to present your plans. And some of those plans will include whether it's the seizure of Karg Island, which may be a head fake, whether it's the seizure of 3 islands contested between Iran and the UAE, Greater Lesser Tums, whether it's trying to do a special ops to extract that enriched uranium, which was supposedly removed, bombed to smithereens last June already, we were told by the president. Whether it was the ideas raised earlier in this war, unnecessarily launched, of Kurdish fighters taking over an ethnically concentrated geographic area of Iran. All of these are that slippery slope towards some American boots on the ground. And once you do that, you are even more in a bind. You're even more in a logic that the exit ramps are likely to look less and less attractive to you. So I think we do have to take that very seriously. There will be cautioning voices, some inside government, but we've already talked about the absence of a government process right now. Some from the outside, because if you're in the Gulf, if you're a GCC state, maybe 1, maybe 2 of them are enthusiastic about this war, but most of them are looking at this and saying, what an acute dilemma we face. On the one hand, we rely on America for security. On the other hand, America has brought insecurity. America, despite all the depth of investments and relationships, does not take our core existential interests seriously. It listens to Israel.
Right. Daniel, explain something to us. If the US president launches a ground invasion of Iran, and this is something Iran's foreign minister had said they were waiting for weeks ago, how is it going to look from Tehran's point of view?
So first, Ananya, I think let's make sure we're talking the same language, if I may. I don't think we're looking at a mass ground invasion of tens of thousands of troops. I think we are potentially looking at something that looks more like special operations, much lower numbers, with the intention of not leading to a much larger deployment. However, as we all know, these things tend to slip once you're in that dynamic. Iran has said, "Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. Come." Then you're even more of a target. It's a bit like the Straits of Hormuz situation. They put out a tweet at one stage: "We will guarantee the safety of any ship that can convince the Americans to escort it." What were they saying? Bring an American ship which we can target. So I think there's a degree of Iranian confidence. And look, there's information warfare, of course, going on all sides. But given what we've seen so far, the Iranian confidence that an American intervention on the ground becomes a sitting duck, that's the same as the story on the shipping. That's where America might incur casualties. I mean, when you're doing all this as a standoff war, when you're sending missiles, you don't incur the likelihood of too many body bags coming home. That changes when you put people on the ground. And so in that respect, and given the dynamics of the conflict so far, it's not unreasonable to assume that this kind of an American escalation is not going to play out simply for America. It's not just going to be a cakewalk whatsoever. And as with Hormuz, Iran, with relatively limited response capacity, but in an asymmetrical war where it has defined a lot of the modus operandi, can achieve a lot even when America is the more powerful party. On the shipping, Iran just has to be able to pose a credible threat for the insurance and shipping companies to do the rest.
Daniel, my next question, I'm asking this risking, and I realize it, risking conjecture. There is constant chatter around the killing of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I'm not going to ask you whether that's true or not, but what kind of an impact can that have if confirmed?
The impact would be huge, but I think Mr. Netanyahu is very much walking among the living. And as I mentioned before, there is an information war going on in parallel to other aspects of this war. Israel maintains a strict censorship in terms of what is being hit. That's not always something that can be fully achieved. Sometimes when it's clear that enough imagery is going to get out, you actually lose credibility by trying to cover it up too much. Israel is the Israeli media, the Israeli leadership are telling their own people one story, but I think the speculation regarding the well-being of the Israeli premier falls into that sweet spot of disinformation.
And how much consensus do you think he has of his fellow citizens?
Well, this is an interesting point because one of the remarkable things, and it's been the case for the last 2.5 years, is in the Zionist political establishment, which is all the parties that especially represent the Jewish Israeli population. There is a minority of Palestinian Arabs in Israel in a different place on this. There is a tremendous consensus in that Zionist political establishment. Very few questions are being asked about the war itself. Is this a good idea? What are the goals? Are they achievable? Those are beginning to be raised by a smattering of media, by some former security folks. But in a way, the political opposition, which acts as no opposition at all, almost as it did in Gaza, is often overtaking the premier by being more extreme. So the public is behind this. There are, as I said, nagging doubts beginning to emerge in certain circles. For instance, there's a bit of a blame game going on at the moment between the prime minister and the Mossad chief over were there exaggerated claims of an ability to instigate a coup inside Iran, that the Mossad had assets that could, if you decapitated the regime leadership, then we could bring about. And the Mossad have said, no, that's not what we said. That obviously, if you're playing a blame game in the middle of the war, that means things aren't necessarily going well. There are real questions about the depletion of interceptor stocks, of how much launch capacity and higher grade weaponry, missiles, Iran has kept in reserve, and whether Israel and the US are depleting their interceptors. A very revealing thing that's playing out in the Israeli media right now is the chief of staff of the army turning around and saying, we don't have enough soldiers to be conducting this multiple front operation in Lebanon, in the West Bank and Gaza against Iran. So those are the issues. But the Israeli public has been told for so long that this is existential, even though Israel is a nuclear power and Iran is not. The Israeli public has a political class that has so abandoned the idea that there are political solutions that, unsurprisingly, and although they are running in and out of shelters and protective rooms every day, at the moment there is still public support.
Then, as I wrap up, let me ask you this. Do you think it would be far-fetched to wonder how this war looks to America's other adversaries, maybe a country like North Korea, which already has a very nuclear arsenal? Iran is only accused of pursuing, at least allegedly. How do you see that?
I think it's not only worthwhile, but very necessary to ask how this is looking. If you're an adversary, or if you're defined by the US in those terms, you are probably not altogether unhappy with what you're seeing. You are probably in a better place than if you are an ally of the US today. First of all, the US is giving a fantastic display of exactly how it uses its military kit, how it conducts warfare at the start of the second quarter of the 21st century. So if you have an effective satellite system, you can be tracking that perfectly. The US is also demonstrating its inability to prioritize, and it is depleting much of its own weaponry, and it is showing how unreliable it is as it rants and raves against its allies. So this is a demonstration right now of American unseriousness, unreliability, and weakness. That is a bad place to be if you are the US, I would argue. And it's not at all a bad place to be if you're a country that the US has defined as a challenge and might go after in the future. The attempt on the part of the US, and this is the crux of it, if I get beyond the peculiarities of the Trump administration, the attempt to reassert primacy and preponderance in what is a reality of a multipolar world suggests America is anxious about its own decline and has not come up with an effective, workable strategy. And that is going to serve America ill. So that's the reality we're dealing with.
You know, every time we try to sit down and dissect America's current foreign policy, I feel like Henry Kissinger might be twisting and turning in his grave. He once had said to be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And every single day, that's what I feel like we are staring at.
And I think there's only a one-word response to that, amen, because you're absolutely right.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for sitting down with us at Hindustan Times. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
It's been a pleasure talking, Ananya. Thank you.